and welcome to Education Matters. I'm your host, Joy Hoffmeister. As Superintendent of Public Instruction for Oklahoma, I am thrilled for the opportunity to visit with you about public education across the state. Today, we'll be discussing the importance of early reading. Do you know someone who struggles to read? Whether that person is a child or adult, no one should have to struggle. The earlier the difficulty is identified and addressed, the more likely that person is to be successful. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll discuss techniques you can use at home and in the classroom, and the facts surrounding the science of reading. Joining me now is Melissa Dahlgren. Melissa is a member of our team at the State Department of Education, focusing her attention on early readers. So when discussing this topic, Melissa, you mentioned that speaking is natural, but reading is not. Tell us what you mean by that.
Absolutely. We have had spoken language around for hundreds of thousands of years. That has been around. The brain is naturally wired for language and to be able to speak. But when we started introducing print, it's only been about 10,000 years ago. And so the brain has not been wired to be able to recognize those symbols on the page, to be able to decode that, to translate that into what we say. So our job is teaching children how to read is to make sure that they know how to translate those symbols into the words that we say. And that's just not something that's done naturally.
Yes, so there are some steps that come with that.
Absolutely, yes.
And as a former reading teacher myself in early grades, that development of phonemic awareness is important before we introduce phonics.
Yes.
But there's a step and
there
process.
Absolutely is, and there's some different components. When we say reading, we're talking really about a lot of different things. So we're talking about phonological awareness, which is how your brain processes sounds. Phonics, which is how we decode those words on the page. Fluency, which is how we get it out there. Vocabulary, understanding those words, and then comprehension, which is the overall understanding of what we read. And we talk about that in the view of the simple view of reading, which is a very simple model, which basically says we have word recognition, or how to decode those words, and then we have comprehension of language, and that those two together translate to comprehension of the language or the reading of what we've read. So when we're talking about early readers, what we really have to recognize is that we have to address both sides of that. So word recognition, which is where a lot of our students really struggle with, so phonological awareness or processing those sounds, and phonics, which is translating those sounds in that print and putting it together to be able to make words. That's where a lot of our kids really struggle when we're looking at early reading skills. But at the same time, we also have to pull in that vocabulary and the background knowledge and all of those things that we experience in the world to be able to give meaning to those words that we've just translated.
Yes, and so we know that there are many children and adults who struggled when they were learning to read. I was one of those. Reading was not easy for me. It kind of runs in my family to have that struggle. And it wasn't until I was a reading teacher, but given the instruction of how to give explicit phonics instruction, that I actually even began to acquire some of those decoding skills that are needed, even though I was able to compensate, yet being a very slow reader perhaps, while I was in school and even in high school.
Well, and you mentioned too, it runs in your family, and we do know that a lot of times reading difficulties is hereditary. It's how our brains process reading, and so that when we see reading difficulties, if the parents have had reading problems in the past, then it's going to make sense that their children may have issues as well. That's a red flag for teachers to be aware of, to make sure that they are really identifying those needs and intervening quickly, because it can be remediated. The earlier we catch it, the better, because we have more of a chance of being able to do that. It only takes about 30 minutes of instruction for a kindergartner to get things caught up. That equivalent time would be 4 hours after third grade.
Wow.
So it takes a lot longer to really catch kids up when we wait longer and longer. So waiting until second and third grade, it's just not enough. We have to catch them in kinder and first, and even before they get to school.
Well, that also helps, I think, really as we think through what does the research say. And we know that there is important research about why it matters to be preparing students in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and by third grade we want to see certain various levels of reading. What are some of the statistics that we know about with students who are struggling in the third grade, and what that could mean if we do not address that soon?
Well, and we know that when students struggle in third grade, that they are 4 times more likely to be a high school dropout than if they have those foundational reading skills that they need by then. That's a critical year, according to national and even international research that's been done, that at that point in time, we're now shifting over to now that really focusing more on that comprehension of language to really understand what's being read, not the translation of those words on the page. And so in those early grades, we're really focusing in on just those basic building block skills. So that's one of the reasons that we see that we start testing our kiddos as soon as they get into school at kindergarten. We give them short, quick screeners because we do know that there are skills that we should be seeing at that age, and if not, we need to quickly get in there and give them those skills so that they can continue to progress with their peers.
Well, and Melissa, you know very well, as we are members of the same team at the State Department of Education, that we have actually been able to identify through the Reading Sufficiency Act, which is a piece of legislation that directs our schools to begin looking at our kindergartners and first graders to not leave this to chance, but to use that real brief screener to ensure that our students are on track grade by grade, because we know we have 80,000 children right now in Oklahoma public schools that we have identified as not being right on track with where they need to be. And we call those individuals a struggling reader. And we've got to do more to meet their needs.
So the screener is a place to start, and that's absolutely where we start. So we get them started with screening to say this child is at risk or not at risk. But then past that, we also give other assessments which might be more diagnostic in nature, to be able to say specifically what are the areas that this child needs help with, so that we can match that intervention. And then we monitor the progress as they're going, so that we make sure that they're catching up. We don't just leave that to chance. And so there's a whole system that comes in. So it sometimes feels like we're talking about a lot of assessment with littles, but they're very brief and quick checkpoints, just like when we go to the doctor and we go get those quick checkups. And the doctor's able to tell us, you're on track for being healthy, you're on track for doing what you want to be able to do. And so that's the same thing that we're doing in our classrooms, is we want to give them that way of saying we're on track for being able to continue to work to be successful.
Next, I want to bring out a teacher who is excelling with early reading practices. In fact, Amanda Raup was the recipient of a very special recognition in 2016. Take a look.
State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister dropped by Hilda Elementary to congratulate students on going from a D to a B on the school report card in 4 years.
Wow, great things are happening right here at Hilldale. We know that you all have worked so hard as a community.
But little do the students and staff know, there's an extra surprise for one special first grade teacher. What some call the Oscars of Teaching Awards is about to be presented. Yes, $25,000, as in dollars. There's hint after hint until this moment.
It is my honor to announce the newest recipient of the Milken Educator Award, Amanda Raup.
Amanda Raup is one of only a few educators in the nation to get this year's honors, and the only one this year for our state.
She stands as a model of a teacher who's only taught for 6 years, but has been recognized as making such a difference.
And if the look on Amanda Raup's face doesn't say it enough, we sat her down to talk about the honor.
My mouth dropped open and I had nothing to say. I couldn't believe it. It was like, I think I'm dreaming. I really think I'm dreaming.
Raup is an Oklahoma State graduate. She started in engineering but realized education is her true calling. Her passion is to give her students the gift of reading and writing. To her, that is the real honor.
I also just get to love on them, and that's really fun. They mean a lot to me, so.
And she means a lot to them. Student Tony Giosio's reaction says it all.
I felt kind of scared that she might leave.
But Ralph says Oklahoma is her home, and she's got a great team. Lacey Lett, Oklahoma's News Channel 4.
A quick thank you to KFOR in Oklahoma City for letting us use their story. Amanda, thank you for being here. Also joining us is Dr. Mary Dahlgren. Mary is a national literacy consultant and president and founder of Tools for Reading. Mary, so glad that you could join us as well. Both of you are working with Oklahoma teachers, whether that's colleagues or whether you are training them, Mary. What are you both seeing as important needs for Oklahoma classrooms?
So I think first teachers need to know where their students are, what skills they're lacking, what skills they already have, and then meet them with those needs. And when we are meeting their needs, their skill deficits, we need to make sure that we're using best practices to meet those needs. We know from science, we know from research what those best practices are, so the question is, are we putting them into place in classrooms throughout Oklahoma?
And I think we, as we talked about the screeners earlier, and using those screeners, as you said, figuring out where students are, and the importance of our screeners, that they really give us thumbs up or thumbs down. If this child is doing okay, we keep providing good, best, first practice. So typically in a kindergarten through third grade classroom, we have what we frequently call Tier 1 instruction. That's usually a 90-minute block of reading instruction. And then there's often another 30 minutes, and that's where our intervention comes in for kindergarten through third grade, and sometimes a little bit more, depending upon the deficits that we're identifying. But the screeners don't tell us those things. We need to dig a little deeper to figure out what are the deficits that children have so we can plan that right instruction. And I started working with Amanda 5 or 6 years ago when she was in the classroom, and we talked about the difference between philosophy and thinking, and we always want children to have a love for reading. That's our goal. We always want that to develop, but children don't love reading when they don't know how to read. And so Amanda and I talked a lot about what she started with when she came out of the universities, and so the same for me is learning about how to provide that explicit systematic instruction that our students need, and shifting from what you might have learned into understanding best practices through good quality professional development. And that's as lots of veteran teachers that have been in the classroom that haven't had that instruction and knowing, what do I do to intervene now? And we can't just have random acts of instruction, but we need to have the best practices and very targeted instruction.
When I started teaching, it was very much, this child doesn't know how to read, so here are some books, and practice reading those books, and you'll figure out how to read. And then I went through lots of professional development, and I was very lucky to be able to go through that so early on in my career, and it radically changed my reading instruction. And now I am not, well, you'll figure it out, but I'm very purposeful, very driven in how I approach reading instruction, and making sure I'm meeting them where their needs are.
Yeah.
And one of the things to point out too is we do know that there is a natural progression there are skills that build upon one another, and it's important that teachers understand what that progression of skills is, so that when we have a student that's struggling with reading, we have to match the instruction with the skill that they're needing. If we are giving them instruction at a level that's too high or too low, it's not going to help them make those gains that they need to have.
And we can't hopscotch through the skills. No. And that's also knowing, again, best practice. What is the continuum of phonological awareness, and how do I get my students to that phonemic level, and also learning about the print. We talked about that earlier, and the idea that letters represent sounds, and then I have to learn about bigger chunks of syllables and meaningful parts of words, and knowing as a teacher how to introduce those things. And it doesn't matter if I'm in kindergarten, or maybe I've made it to third grade and I'm still functioning with those kindergarten skills. I haven't advanced through. As a teacher, I need to have the skills to say, how do I adjust instruction for these children? And that's one of our goals in our state, is to really prepare teachers to be able to do that and make those good instructional decisions.
And so it can be great stress and pressure on those who are new to the profession. What thoughts do you have for them?
So I will say my mentor wrote a seminal paper called Teaching Reading is Rocket Science. And it's, if everybody could do it, we wouldn't have the reading gaps that we have. So knowing how to provide the good professional development, attending quality professional development, having the opportunities, the state is providing lots of those opportunities now for our teachers in Oklahoma, and even our veteran teachers who have been at this for a long time, but will say, I didn't know then what I know now, and the differences that I can make, and I'm learning how to close those gaps with those students. So again, learning about the 5 components of reading, learning about writing, and using assessments in a skillful way so that we don't waste time for children, and that we can close the gaps for all kids. And I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is also our special education teachers. It's not just gen ed, but it's special education. We all need to be on the same page, because even in special education, many of our teachers don't have the skill set that they need, because it's becoming more and more challenging every year as they're working with kids in the classroom.
This is such an important topic, but before we move on, I want to share a segment from the State Department of Education's ongoing series called Shaped My Life. Here's former Oklahoma City Thunder star Nick Collison talking about the teacher who made a huge impact on his life and career. And in case you missed it, this month, for the first time ever, the Oklahoma City Thunder retired a number that was Nick's number 4.
A memorable teacher for me growing up, I had a lot of really good teachers. Randy Fiskus was my 9th grade shop teacher. We had a class called Industrial Tech. That was cool. I was terrible at wood shop, but I made more of a connection with him through basketball. He was my 9th grade basketball coach, and it was really good for me at a time when I was a young player, and taught me a lot about discipline and playing hard. He was pretty tough on us, but really had a positive influence in my life.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk a little bit about families. And often families are talking about dyslexia when they see their child struggle, and they wonder, does my child have dyslexia? Mary, how do you answer that?
That's a really great question, and something that, again, our foundational reading skills need to be addressed. And one of the concerns that I have is that we have children that have not had good foundational skills in phonological awareness and phonics instruction, therefore they're being identified as dyslexic, versus kids who truly have dyslexia. It is a neurobiological issue that's happening. We know the left side of the brain is where reading occurs, and that's important for teachers to understand how all that happens. But as a parent, noticing when children have issues like they can't remember the letters of the alphabet, and maybe there are siblings that have picked it up naturally and easily learned with very few repetitions, where a dyslexic child will take many more repetitions. And that's something also for classroom teachers to know, that good instruction will oftentimes even prevent a child from having to go through extra remediation. But because I'm not a good reader initially does not mean I'm dyslexic. So that's one of the things that I think is really important as we really start talking about this more and more in our state, and understanding the amount of repetitions that a child needs when they're dyslexic. And it's typical for a dyslexic student to always be dysfluent, that they're not going to have that reading rate that a typical reader has. But the other side of that is we also consider the intelligence that has to do with solving problems, the creative thinking, the outside the box thinking. So there's a lot of good things that we're recognizing in our state as we talk about dyslexia and what teachers need to know. And I know we're going to be working on providing further education in that too, that awareness.
Well, and we also know that regardless of a diagnosis, those students who are struggling to keep pace with reading progress need explicit, systematic phonics instruction. That works for all students regardless of diagnoses. And this is something that, as we are training our teachers to help partner with families. Amanda, talk to us a little bit about how you work with the families in your own classroom.
So I like to tell families to play a game in the car and take a word like cat and say, hey, would you tell me the sounds in the word cat? And you want your child to be able to tell you all those sounds, k, at. Make it a little harder. Put 4 sounds in the word and say frog. Let's do the sounds in frog. And then you can go the other direction and say, I'm going to say a magic word. Listen, frog. What word was it? And they're going to have to blend those sounds together. That's the phonemic awareness piece that we're talking about throughout this. Anything, there's no print attached. It's all about sounds that they're hearing. But the phonics piece is, do you see that letter over there? What letter do you see? That's an M. It says mm. Let's sound this word out together. And then the last piece would be make sure that you're reading at home with your child. They can read, you can read. They really need to hear you reading and modeling that fluent reading for them. And then if there's a word that you think they can sound out, let them sound it out. What we don't want to tell kids is look at the picture and guess at what this word is. Because we know from research that that is not how the brain learns to read. That's not how the brain reads. Every reader looks at every letter in that word to sound it out and read it. We fluent readers just do it so quickly that you don't think you're sounding out the word, but you really are. So we never want to tell our kids to guess, but we always want to tell our kids to sound it out.
And that's decoding.
Yes,
that's what we are describing.
And I think it's so important, as you were saying, as parents playing games in the car. The other day I was in the grocery store and I heard a parent pushing her child in the cart and she was saying A and he says B. She says C, and I thought, yay, I'm so happy that you're not on your phone or your child doesn't have a tablet in their hand while walking through the grocery store, but there's opportunities all day long to interact with your child, reading to your child, talking to your child, but playing games, pointing out letters. Can you find the letters in your name as we walk through the grocery store? All those types of things are great tips for parents to do with young children and to continually do and make sure that they're engaging their kids and thinking about what's happening in their world around them.
Well, one of the reasons why I thought this would be such an important topic to talk about right now in the school year is the assessment window opens in the month of April each year. And this is where in 3rd grade there is a hyper focus on a reading assessment. And that hyper focus on one day, one test on one day, is really inappropriate. And as state superintendent, I want to say that we do not want one test on one day to determine a child's future. This is really about the many years leading up to a place where we need a checkpoint of that kind of progress so that we can intervene. But we want to intervene early. Kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, with those important strategies to help our students and relieve some of the stress that I think teachers are feeling that gets transferred to students.
Absolutely, it does. And as you said, I've heard you say many times, it's not about one test and one day. And we have the Reading Sufficiency Act in Oklahoma that dictates that we have that opportunity to start screening and intervening beginning in kindergarten. We've just tended to focus on the end of the race rather than the beginning, and we're trying to shift that focus back to where it's the most effective during the beginning and the middle of that race rather than the end. But when we get to that point and we have a 3rd grader that is still struggling, it's not the end-all and be-all of that test score. That's just one of 4 pathways for being able to be promoted. We don't want to see a lot of kids being retained. That's really not going to help them. The research says it won't help them. What is going to be effective is the intervention that we provide. There's very few instances in which retention is going to be just the right answer for that child.
And I think that's very misunderstood as well. So we want to support the whole child and the whole reader. There are tools that we can make available for our families that are wanting to support a grandchild or a neighbor, and many volunteers that work in schools to support our children with volunteer hours around reading as well. And we know that there are resources even at the State Department of Education's website. So we invite all our families and our community to support the reader, and also to support our teachers as they need to be equipped. And we thank you very much, Mary, for the work that you are doing to equip and train in literacy. And Amanda, the perspective that you bring as a teacher and the important work you're doing with your young students as well. And thank you, Melissa, for answering the phones and coaching and working with both families and educators at the Department of Education. So we love hearing from our viewers. If you have a topic you'd like to see us discuss on Education Matters, or if you would like additional information on anything we've talked about today, send us an email at educationmatters@sde.ok.gov. Now, my school spotlight this month is Hoover Elementary in Tulsa Public Schools. I had the privilege of visiting the school earlier this month, and what I saw was innovation and creativity around character education at its best. One of the most wonderful things that we saw was a living wax museum where students portrayed historical figures in costume. From Steve Jobs to Helen Keller, students were ready and willing to tell me all about their characters. Something else that caught my eye, or rather my reflection, was the wall of mirrors inside Hoover Elementary. A sign above the wall said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, there's a leader in us all." That is so true. So I want to thank the leaders there at that school and for leaders everywhere who are making sure all the students, whether at Hoover Elementary or in the communities in Oklahoma, that they find the leader inside each one. We're out of time today, but we hope to see you back here next time for Education Matters.